G'day and God bless you. My name is Jarrett Vandenbosch, and I humbly welcome you to my channel, Atheist for Christ. Sorry for the poor audio quality. At the moment, it's being recorded on my potato phone, but if this ministry takes off, I'll be able to invest in better sound equipment to capture the majestic voice that God has given me. Today, I am reacting to a video by the evolutionary biologist Clints Reptiles. In this video, he is going to dissect creationist arguments by prominent creationists. I'm going to do a lot of fast forwarding through their side, partly because it's cringe and partly because it's just going to make this video extremely long. His original video is 47 minutes and I would like to spare you as much of that as possible while creating content that is hopefully going to be informational and encouraging to believers and informational and challenging to unbelievers. But without further ado, let's get into it.
Science is a model of reality, not reality itself, and not the truth. The great thing about models is that they can often help us better understand the natural world. Science, at its best, is a highly predictive model of reality. But the problem with models is that they are all wrong. All of them. So I believe that our evolutionary model is wrong. But it is also, based on the evidence that we have available to us at this time, the most predictive and useful model we have ever had to explain how the diversity of life forms that we see today came to be since the dawn of life.
Here there are at least two problems. Firstly is that many professors and almost all cultural commentators talk about evolution in an almost religious truth sense, that it is 100% real and that it proves that creation is incorrect. Secondly, that the idea of evolution is not actually predictive at all, but it is descriptive and prescriptive. It is a commentary on the past, and I am certainly not aware of any predictions, at least none that are worth anything anyway, that are made and then verified by the evolutionary thinking, that would not have already been made by creationist thinking, and that are also not just fantasies through processes such as speculative evolution. We'll take a quick note aside here. Speculative evolution is an extremely fun fantasy pastime. There are lots of other YouTubers and also artists, etc., that create whole fantasy worlds to do with speculative evolution. What would things look like if they evolved, such as a planet where everything is a bird, and it's great fun, but it has no basis in reality.
I accept it as good science so far as I've been able to evaluate it. So belief is probably the wrong word for it.
Now, I really like Clint, and I knew before going in that this was the kind of argument that he'd be making. And this more genuine, realistic thought process is much more common among unbelievers than when I was an atheist 20 years ago.
But I accept it for what it is, a powerfully predictive and useful model. His next question really starts off a list of silly questions. And I think I'll take them on all at once, since they all have the same fundamental flaw. In addition to the fact that the epiglottis is not the Adam's apple.
I agree with Clint here, partially. I spared you Ray Comfort's layman-level attempt to inspire doubt in the random person on the street, who, in all likelihood, is a low IQ individual, for better or for worse. He is especially correct that they do have the same fundamental flaw. I cannot even blame the poor American education levels, as Ray Comfort challenges him to ask a professor. Now, always this is a poor move if you don't know what you're doing. On a side note though, a good friend of mine once threw me right under the bus on a nighttime street evangelism by introducing me to a real marine biologist to discuss evolution, without even telling me.
The Adam's apple is a cartilaginous protuberance that protects the larynx, the voice box. The epiglottis is what he described it to be, a leaf-shaped valve that directs food to the esophagus and air to the trachea. So his questions were, How did man see before the eye evolved? How did man mate before the eye evolved? How did man eat food before his epiglottis evolved? How did man think before his brain evolved? How did he walk around, look for food, and live before his brain evolved? And how long did he have to wait for his brain to evolve?
I knew Clint would say this. It was what I was screaming at Ray Comfort only a few minutes earlier. Without a brain, or eyes, or larynx, the being described is not a man. And that aside, there are animals that don't have all these or any of these, and they still manage to feed and mate. A great summary by Clint. He isn't an idiot.
And the answer to all of these questions are he didn't and no time at all.
So here Clint now falls into the same trap that Ray Comfort does. He is also knocking down a straw man, though I don't know if I can fault Clint for this, as Ray Comfort is putting himself out there and challenging professors through their poorly educated students.
They found mates in ways not unlike the way that eyeless animals find mates today, and many were likely asexual. They ate food similarly to the way that almost all animals eat today without epiglottises. In fact, if lungs were not an out pocket of the gut, it would have probably made a lot of sense not to have food and air go down the same tube to start with. But evolution does not work with what would be the best design, but what is available.
Don't be deceived by the awesome facts Clint is about to show us, and they really are very awesome facts, displaying God's amazing design and creation. The diversity in both kind and complexity of the biological machinery, such as eyes and breathing instruments, does not lead us to a conclusion of evolution. What is missing are two key pieces of evidence. Firstly, the mechanism by which such progress happens, and then the evidence that that progress has ever happened at all. Now, evolutionists will draw pretty diagrams, and if they're skilled like Clint, will fill them with amazing facts. But in the end, they run into the problem of missing links. And as an aside, I know most people don't like missing links. I'm going to do a video on it in the future. Clint here fails to demonstrate, and all other evolutionists do, a correct process that brings about a stable increase in genetic information which leads to a change of creature beyond those that can successfully breed with each other. What normally happens is a very different process whereby creatures branch off from each other and can no longer breed with the descendants and those that came before them. But this is through a loss of genetic information. And that's not even to begin to get into the completely disastrous situation that there really is more difference between the different human races than there are between some species of animals that can't even breed with each other. Disastrous in the sense of for the evolutionary theory.
And lungs are the only ones where ribs have they also have reptiles seem to do better. Turtles, for example, seem to reuse into. They forget to the tongue, which can seal up to close it off with and then plug it back to the nostrils, close and they breathe. And snakes have something similar to life that they extend outside the mouth, so they can swirl around with and then plug it in the nostrils and mouth. Same evolution. And lots of animals do just fine without brains. Some of them don't even have nervous systems. The oldest evidence of life is about 3.7 billion years old, and the first evidence of organisms with brains is a little over 500 million years old. So,
Alright, I spoke too soon. He failed to put up the evidence for life with or without brains. So I won't be commentating on that. You can wait until my video on the flood.
Love to hear you disprove evolution. Can we do that?
We progress to a commentator I've seen talking about health, diet, and medicine. I'm going to skip ahead to Clint's commentary here because he rambles on and it's not particularly clear. Clint's eyes at 9:42, if you go and watch his video, really say a lot here. And that's not even talking about his creepy wristband nonsense.
the first humans, no matter how well they define humans, had eyes and epiglottis and brains. So they didn't have to wait for the brain to evolve, and man didn't see before the eye, before the epiglottis, because they didn't exist before the exist before the we don't think humans evolved from eyeless epiglottis brains. We think humans evolved from apes, which evolved from monkeys, which evolved from primates, which evolved from mammals, which evolved from other acids, which evolved from other animals, which evolved from fish, which evolved from birds, which evolved from cortex, and it goes on until you get to and almost all cortex have eyes and brains, and almost all, if not all animals, have glass. And pretty much all other creatures are doing this line. Plenty of animals are doing this line, they have brain, no eyes, eyes, no brain, neither brain nor eyes. Basically all of those animals also don't have glass. Some animals have yeah, the only animals don't have all three of those, and they have none. Oh boy. Okay. This is a hard one. To be perfectly honest, This guy sounds like an improv comic playing an expert arguing against evolution. Or maybe somebody liked evolution and what they today. But that was a prank. And I'm going to do my best to restate arguments more than that, while discussing some of the arguments as well. It could be that this guy is an actual expert on human body, but he clearly doesn't know very much about evolution at all. And I would probably sound pretty crazy if I were asked a bunch of tough questions about human anatomy and physiology and I didn't feel comfortable just saying that I don't know. So I'll try to be charitable. His big picture argument against evolution seems to be perceived holes in the fossil record.
Perfect. This is going to be good. Biologists hate it when you talk about the fossil record. But in reality, it's a complex subject, so a layman's level discussion isn't going to satisfy Clint. Let's see how he goes.
He seems to think that we should see a progression from 1 to 2-celled and then 4, 8, and 16-celled organisms, like we see in early cell divisions of multicellular organisms. And then an evolution into progressively more what he calls being-like creatures. And I'm going to pause there because that isn't really what we would expect to find. I would expect the first cellular life forms to be very simple cells, then more complicated cells, and then colonies of cells. It would actually require a lot more mechanisms to get a colony to stop growing at 2, 4, 8, or 16 cells than to just keep growing. And all it takes to get single cells to become a colony is that they have to stick together for some reason. Any reason will do. Bam, got a colony. So I would expect to see colonies of cells of no particular size. Then I would expect slight amounts of specialization, perhaps like we see in sponges, where the cells work together but can also survive independently. Then higher levels of specialization where the cells are so interdependent that they can no longer survive in isolation. From there, tissues, organs, organ systems, and I would expect all of that to predate being-like creatures. And
So far, I agree with Clint here, but
I would predict that if by being-like creatures he means human being-like creatures, and given that human being-like creatures exist now, I would predict that the farther back in time you go...
Alright, gotta interrupt. I know people who look like both of the so-called Neanderthals or other ancient hominids shown in this picture. If not for the skin colour, I know both Phoenicians and Italians who look like this. Not to mention Islanders. Also, the eyebrows in these pictures are always exaggerated lies. They either take the skulls from obviously ape-like creatures and put human faces, especially the eyes, on them, or human-like creatures and add the ape-shaped brows to them.
The less human being-like, the most human being-like creatures you can find on Earth will become. And this is the exact pattern that we see not only in the fossil record, but also reflected in the genomes of organisms alive today.
This here is a downright lie. Not that I think Clint is directly lying, but we do not see this clear progression in the fossil record at all. We see parts of it sometimes, however, we can only come to this claim while already believing in evolution, creating somewhat of a circular reasoning argument here. He
claims that evolution says that some bacteria got together in a mud puddle and they mated, and we went from single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms to quadricellular to hexacellular, then back to multicellular, and then these organisms began to form into systems that created organ systems, and then you had a rudimentary non-air-breathing organism that was in the water to an organism that had gills, and those gills moved out onto land and they started to breathe oxygen, and then this whole lineage of species evolved from this.
Before Clint continues, bar for a few minor errors, this is what was basically taught in all Western high schools for years. It may not be accurate today, but we'll see what Clint says.
I'll start off by correcting a few details. First, we don't think that bacteria are the ancestors of other life forms, in particular anything with organ systems, gills, or anything like that. Bacteria seem to form their own monophyletic group. Archaea would be the group of non-eukaryotic life forms from which other life appears to have come.
Amazing facts, but mostly relevant. Let's pretend that he knew better and said archaea.
Second, bacteria don't mate. They reproduce asexually, mostly by binary fission, sometimes swapping bits of genetic material with one another via horizontal gene transfer, but that isn't reproduction, let alone sexual reproduction. And I don't know what a mud puddle has to do with any of this. Third, I don't know how we're going from single-celled to multi-celled and then to quadricellular, then hexacellular this time, not octacellular like before, and then back to multicellular again.
More awesome facts, but mostly irrelevant again. Let's pretend that the original speaker knew better.
Assuming the first multi-cell meant two-cell, but multicellular actually life cycle from single-cell to multi-cell, and then not all these other steps. Okay. Then everyone mentioned then those gills moved on. Okay. Then they started to breathe oxygen. I think he meant air. They were extracting oxygen from the water with those gills, and with other structures even before those gills came to be. Everything that does aerobic cellular respiration is breathing oxygen, even bacteria. And truth be told, looking just at organisms alive today, the ability to extract oxygen from air probably predated a move on to land. Literally all bony fishes, every lineage, have lungs.
This is what makes Clint entertaining to listen to. He's about to show the evolutionary leaps of logic here that makes the statement true within his belief system, while throwing out amazing facts. I'm going to zip through these amazing facts to get to his next point, but he's basically saying that swim bladders are lungs, and then goes on to describe some fish with other air-breathing organs.
In one major fish, those lungs modified swim bladder, and in coelacanths, those lungs are filled with oil to help it buoyancy more effectively for fish, then swim bladders are breathing. But many fishes that don't leave the water have lungs and they extract oxygen from air. Some of them leave water, and others extract oxygen from other structures, like the laboratory does, since their lungs start to degrade. I guess what I'm saying is that the organisms with those gills that moved onto land could probably extract oxygen from air long before those gills moved onto land.
Fair point if evolution was real, but we haven't gotten to the root cause of the actual problem.
And of course, we see lots of animals moving around land today, so we don't know what is alive. And most species like lungs fossilized poorly. The fossil genetic variable twists suggest that this will happen. One step of the cellular system, organisms in water, then gills, then extract oxygen from air, then move on. And of course, once vertebrates moved onto land, well, there were a lot of open niches. So a lot of radiation from those original land colonizers is not unexpected. And again, is quite well reflected in the fossil and genetic records.
For those of you who didn't realize, he's not actually talking about nuclear radiation in here. It's not like the X-Men. Instead, what he's talking about is the idea that creatures can diversify and fill in a whole range of different environmental niches in all directions. Importantly, this lines up with the story of creation. After the Great Flood and the subsequent decades of extreme climate change, the surviving animals all spread out across the world. And as mutation and normal genetic selection pressures took place, they began to fill the empty niches that the swiftly changing world provided, if they survived. Not all of the animals that were on the ark did survive, unfortunately, because not many dinosaurs or macro animals did so, especially not to today. Clint can counter me with his famous chicken argument here, but that can wait.
So we said there is zero evidence. I have no idea what you're talking about. We have basically no evidence that it happened any other way. And that's where we just started evolution. We have single organisms, multiple organisms, the gigantic fossil record, and animals, and they can. I'll start with the fact that the basal most animals alive today are not all that different from a colony of other eukaryotic cells. I'm teaching animal diversity online right now at Clints Life Science Academy, and if you're in that class, you know that animals like sponges and placozoans are pretty basic. The earliest animals in the fossil and genetic record are really simple compared to something like the man that he claims just popped up in the fossil record.
I will comment on this part. It is not a surprise to Christians to find that simple organisms are found on the bottom of the fossil record. Though, technically, many are found on the top, being Mount Everest, but still, if animals that cannot move are buried by the flood, especially sea life, then it guarantees that they will be beneath other animals that can. This also goes on to swampy biomes, undersea biomes, and slow-moving creatures will almost always, when they're fossilized at all, be beneath the more complex or higher living organisms. No surprise.
We find very simple animals like primitive sponges and placozoans, then slightly more complex animals like cnidarians, then simple bilaterally symmetrical animals, eventually simple chordates, simple vertebrates, simple fish-like organisms, early bony fishes, early tetrapods, early amniotes, early synapsids, early mammals, early eutherian mammals, and a progression of more and more primate-like mammals until you get clear primates. A progression of primates until you get early monkeys.
Per one of my earlier comments, this progression is not nearly as clean as Clint would have you believe. Lots of missing stuff, lots of layers that don't line up with each other, which it's part of the more complex debate on missing fossils. I'm going to skip ahead to the next person, and oh, dang it, it's Kent Hovind. Oh, we'll go on with it.
Fossils prove evolution. I say, guys, you got to be kidding. Fossils prove evolution? No fossil counts for evidence for evolution. None. Fossil record? There is no fossil record. There are a bunch of bones in the dirt. Now you're putting your interpretation on them, okay? It's not a record.
Kent is correct here. Evolutionists do place their own interpretation on them, no matter what Clint's eyes are saying here. Although Kent isn't as charitable to evolutionists as they sometimes deserve, then again, if you have to deal with people like Richard Dawkins or worse, I can't really blame him. I'm going to skip ahead here to Clint's commentary and react to that.
Okay, so that's a different approach. Instead of saying that there are giant holes in the fossil record, why not just claim that there is no fossil record? But I've got to tell you, we're going to dive deep into some really cool aspects of ecology, paleontology, and evolution to address this argument. So maybe go get your popcorn.
Alright, I'm going to get my popcorn. I like learning, but Clint, take a breath. It's so hard to react to this content when your breaths are 25 milliseconds long.
Okay, so his argument is that there is no fossil record at all. No fossil accounts for evidence of evolution. Well,
yes, here's a record, and this is why I don't like Kent Hovind. He's even more strawman-like than Ray Comfort. In his defense, he's only talking to churches.
we have a bunch of bones in the dirt. We can't look back at fossils, right? You look at fossils in the present, and you put your interpretation. If you had bone in the dirt, all we know that died, and obviously lived for some period of time, you wouldn't know that any offspring survived, especially if they're different from their parents. And yes, why would you think a bone in the dirt would be able to do something that animals today cannot, namely produce something other than a crop? The answer is that there are no missing links, rather the entire chain is. And any something seems to be equal, that will address after we get through this part. But I think we need to talk about this first thing first, that there is no fossil record. That's true. There are fossils, and even if there's record of something died, well, that's right. But that isn't all that they record. They tell us a lot also about the size and basic anatomy of that organism. They tell us what other organisms lived in their environment. They often tell us what that animal ate, and sometimes what ate them.
This is actually a powerful indicator of the global flood, that organisms can be found fossilized with food in them. For this to happen, fossilization must be dramatically quick, especially in a saltwater environment, which these fishes certainly were, though probably much less salty than today's seas. The ancient Romans made fish sauce by simply placing fish in a barrel with salt and herbs whole, and by the end of it, there was mush and sauce, and no bones, and certainly not an intact skeletal structure.
They often teach us about behaviors those organisms likely exhibited. They can teach us about their reproductive strategies and growth patterns. They tell us where they lived, and thanks to technologies like the radiometric dating that we discussed in this video.
Oh boy, that is a topic that will probably be worth at least 5 videos just in itself.
They often tell us approximately when that organism lived. So there is clearly a fossil record. The assertion that there isn't is absurd on its face. But the question remains, is the fossil record that we have evidence for evolution, or is it not? Because it is true that if you find a bone in the dirt, you don't know if it had any offspring that survived.
Now, I did not expect him to deal with the real argument here. So, let's see what he says. But before we do, I love that previous picture, the standard drowning pose that fossil has. Such great evidence for a global flood. There are so many fossils, especially theropods and such, where they've got that arched back, and that is absolutely typical of an animal that is drowning in its death throes, desperately trying to get oxygen into its lungs.
You would know if any offspring that it did have were different from the organisms that found. And sure, many reasons suspect that offspring didn't know as an animal today did a lot of play, or that produced something other than time. We'll talk about that in a Let's talk about whale evolution for a minute. Whale evolution is a fun subject, not because the fossil record is much more complete than it is for other organisms, though it may be simply because very large bones often preserve better than small ones, but because the change is so dramatic. You're probably familiar with whales. And the funny thing about whales isn't really their size or basic shape, it is that they're mammals.
Whales are indeed awesome, and it is cool that man classifies them as mammals, though they are sea creatures.
Pretty soon we would find that all mammals would have needed to have come out of the sea, with only whales and sirenians remaining there full time. And it wouldn't just end with the mammals. So this from the sea hypothesis just keeps getting pushed back, with more and more distinct lineages colonizing the land without leaving any or at least many ocean-bound relatives. It is pretty clear, just from the genetics, but also based on fossils, that ungulates have an origin on land.
I love Clint's description of why a certain evolutionary hypothesis cannot be correct. It's great. And if you were a strawman basher, you would hone in on just this statement. But I'm going to say that the land to sea hypothesis is also flawed, in that it relies on the evolutionary theory to be true to begin with. It is also equally evident from the record, if the Bible is God's word, that whales were created by the same God who created ungulates, which are cow-type creatures, and carnivores, and all other things. This creator God used one basic language to write the code for living creatures. So anything living that shares similar features will have a similar genetic code, which of course would lead you, if you believed in evolution, that they were related by ancestry, when instead they are related by a common designer.
And that is how science works. Science is never absolutely certain that it has found the truth. It's a model, after all. It almost certainly has not found the exact truth.
Take a breath, Clint. It's a nice thing for you to say, but that is not how scientists or the common man acts or thinks about evolution.
But the scientific method works by creating models that make predictions, and then testing those predictions to see if they are accurate or inaccurate based on the evidence that we can observe in the here and now.
And this is the flaw with the scientific model, as it cannot predict for anything that it cannot observe in the here and the now, so it cannot properly be used as a model of the past.
Whales. Did this prove that these fossils of Pakicetus had any offspring? That their offspring were different from their parents? Or that whales are the descendants of Pakicetus? No, science doesn't work in proof. You're thinking of math. But it does support our hypothesis, in that our prediction that if whales evolved from land ungulates, we should be able to find fossils of land ungulates with features unique to whales today, was accurate. But that isn't the only fossil that we would predict to exist. Because if Pakicetus is actually the ancestor of whales, then I would next predict that there should be fossils of whale-like animals with features more like Pakicetus than like modern whales, but more like whales than Pakicetus.
This prediction does not do much to prove the evolutionary account or dispel the creationary account in the end, as we could say this about many animal kinds today, that they are more like one thing than the other, and then form an arbitrary chain of descendants. We don't do that because we know that they don't come from each other. But scientists are able to do this with past animals because they have the mysterious and impenetrable length of time which stops us from being able to prove them wrong.
And those fossils should date to be younger than the fossils of Pakicetus.
Okay, in fairness, he introduces a dating argument here, which does help him display his evidence. But what you need to know before I can do a whole video on it later, is that while incredibly amazing technology, which is highly accurate in its ability to detect minute measurements of atoms, the atomic dating methods have a couple of flaws. First of all, they rely upon the evolutionary assumption to give their results. And secondly, those results are highly variable within a sample and often inaccurate, as in they give a large range for their dating. And then lastly, their results are often overridden by or rely entirely upon the evolutionary idea of geological or paleontological evidence to inform that conclusion, which forms a logic circle, which makes the whole process, if we're being generous, wholly unreliable.
Now, when it comes to producing something other than their kind, this is a place where, for one reason or another, creationists often greatly misrepresent evolutionary theory. Creationists often talk about something called a created kind, or a Barramin.
That's a harsh accusation, Clint, but we are about to explore Barramin, so hopefully this is about to get quite interesting.
A group of organisms that are related to one another by shared ancestry, but not to other kinds, because each kind was created independently by God. So the kinds share common ancestry within their kind, but not with members of other kinds. And they usually say that kinds are roughly equivalent to a Linnaean family. Their concept of kinds generally coincide with relatively small clades of organisms. Often clades that are related to one another closely enough that there is some compatibility between the gametes of all of the members of the clade. But that isn't absolutely essential. Gamete compatibility confirms that they are part of the same kind, but it is not requisite for them to be members of the same kind.
Wow, for such a harsh accusation, Clint does take great care here to accurately describe the idea of barrowmans, or created kinds. Thank you, my friend.
This definition is neither in the dictionary or in the Bible, but it is pretty widely held by young Earth creationists. What they often request is for examples of one kind giving birth to another kind, often like a dog giving birth to a cat or vice versa.
Alright, no credible creationist requires this, but I will give Clint the benefit of the doubt and treat him like he did the others before, in that he is talking about a subject that he doesn't know well.
And the truth is that we don't think that happens. In fact, if that was ever observed, it would totally challenge everything we think we know about evolution. What we do think happens is that new clades can form within existing clades. The definition of a clade is a common ancestor and all of its descendants. It is definitionally impossible to evolve out of a clade.
And this is why I hate the word clade, and why Clint is so fascinating in his long-form videos. This catch-all term includes all the so-called ancestors, so it can be used to prove evolution. But it really just pushes the argument further down the track, rather than dealing with it in the here and the now.
They are still artiodactyls and ungulates and eutherians and mammals and synapsids and amniotes and tetrapods and bony fishes and vertebrates and chordates and deuterostomes and bilaterians and animals and eukaryotes and archaeans and cellular life forms.
Wonder how many takes it took Clint to rattle all those off. Very impressive. But this argument here shows the extremely poor nature of logic behind the theory of evolution. Even if evolution was true, these scientific classifications are too broad to be of any real use in anything other than evolutionary ladders. This description, though, does nothing to provide evidence for or against evolution.
You can't get out of those clades. They are a new kind of artiodactyl and ungulate and eutherian and mammal and synapsid and amniote and tetrapod and bony fish and vertebrate and chordate and deuterostome and bilaterian and animal and eukaryote and archaean and cellular life form, but they are still all of those things. So nothing can evolve out of its kind.
Nothing can evolve out of its kind. Only if we stretch the word kind here to mean literally nothing as far as the English language is concerned. Earlier, he made the statement that the definition for barrowman would not be found in the Bible or the dictionary, but it does have a logically limited definition by those who use it. So, it can be accurately used in language to derive meaning. What Clint has done here is to use a definition of clade so wide in its breadth that it no longer carries any meaning. And this is incredibly entertaining in his other videos, but it's frustrating here, and a classical bait and switch from an evolutionist, like any other argument that they have. I'm going to skip ahead now a little bit to his next point.
He wasn't advocating that evolution doesn't occur. That would fly in the face of all that we know from genetics, fossils, and comparative anatomy, among other disciplines. The question is, does it happen continuously, or does it happen in jumps followed by periods of relative stasis? An idea for which he was a strong proponent, and that I find highly plausible, called punctuated equilibrium, where at times major changes in the environment or significant new variation drives a period of rapid evolution, like I'm sure occurred when tetrapods first left the water.
This is hilarious. Punctuated evolution flies in the face of genetic science. It is a band-aid, the evolutionary version of the God of the Gaps argument. Can you see what he's done here?
In a very short time, huge amounts of evolution would almost certainly need to occur in that lineage as they become better adapted to the new world in which they reside.
Clint doesn't mean a short time in the way that we think about it. He means in relation to evolutionary time. But it is very convenient that he is allowed to shorten the time needed for evolution whenever it suits him. But creationists are criticised for saying that all speciation happened in the last 4,500 years since the Great Flood. And this is when we see speciation happening in front of our eyes, quickly mind you, but without evolution into a new, reasonably described clade, as Clint would put it.
At best. And that isn't out of the ordinary for Kent Hovind, who is the speaker in this video. And the thing is that even many creationists disavow him. But I keep covering his talking points because creationists post his clips all of the time, probably more than anyone else. So he might not be the best advocate for their cause, but he is probably the most watched and shared by YECs. And
Okay, I'll give Clint this one. It is fair for him to use Kent Hovind, even though it's annoying.
I'll tell you, he played a large role in turning me into an atheist in my youth. In fact, I doubt there are many people who have done so much to make atheists as he has. I would reckon that he has made far more atheists from theists than theists from atheists. And even though now I am not an atheist at all, in fact, I am what I would have considered in the past almost psychotically religious, he has whacked me twice in his Wacking Atheist segments, just because he wants to turn me into an atheist again so badly.
Dang! Being an ex-atheist myself, this makes me so angry. It doesn't excuse Clint's poor logical arguments, or his lack of repentance before God, if he isn't saved. Perhaps he is, and can't get past the devil's lies about creation.
But even though, as someone who believes in God, I think that what he does is immoral and terrible, I just wanted to point out that I wish him no ill will.
Okay, it took 9 seconds for me to get an answer on this one. Kind of. Clint doesn't go into what he means by belief in God, but he does live in Utah, so perhaps he converted to Mormonism. But regardless, I want to make it clear that I too wish Clint no ill will. I'll be praying for him to come to the revelation that the Bible is true and that God's account can be trusted.
I don't need him to be silenced. Right after he whacked me, Clint of Clints Reptiles, he was bitten by a rattlesnake. I'm glad he was okay. I think his words cause harm to people. And how do you combat his terrible arguments? By correcting them. By making better arguments. By demonstrating with patience and without strawmanning why his arguments, in their strongest and most accurate form, are flawed.
I really agree with Clint here. While my next videos reacting to evolutionary content will probably be with someone less nice than Clint, I will come back and discuss Clint's strongest arguments and hopefully demonstrate their incorrectness. So stay tuned for those.
And sometimes when we find that we can't defeat words with words, we get angry, sometimes violent. But the reality is that if you can't defeat speech with speech, you either need to learn more or you need to accept the fact that you might be wrong. And in the end, would you rather be on the side of your tribe or on the side of truth?
So Clint is partly right here. He is correct about defeating speech with speech. Though, sometimes a witch or barbarian just needs to be countered with violence. That's a separate video though. I'd probably never to be made on this channel.
Why are youth leaving the church in such large numbers?
Well, I believe then it's the surveys that we've done.
Ooh, an Aussie, just like me. And an excellent question here. Though, no doubt, with Clint's previous swipes at Kent Hovind, he thinks that it's the church's opposition to evolution and the way it goes about it that is the main fault here. We'll skip ahead to Clint's reactions.
I want to start off by saying that for years, I taught biology at Brigham Young University, a university operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and largely attended by members thereof. Not one prayer, and we only mentioned the Creator when we referenced his inordinate fondness for beetles. So maybe it isn't the evolution that is driving people from your churches. Maybe it's the fact that you are teaching them that they can either accept God or science, but not both. And when you back up your case for God by misrepresenting science and the Bible, sooner or later, they find out. And when they do, they will only believe one thing that you told them. They will accept science and reject God. I know that's what happened to me. You can try to defend God with lies and manipulation, but you don't have to.
Clint's message here is well-hearted, and it's so unfortunate that he probably chose the one video that went against the point he's making to drive his point home. You can see my testimony in the first video on this channel, and I can assure you that I was a dyed-in-the-wool, militant jerk of an atheist, the very mean caricature of one in fact, and that my own research in evolution and the regular school teachings drove me away from believing it. I don't doubt for a second that the poor teaching of churches and families have driven people away from God. For the glory of God and for the love of your children, do not give them the ultimatum or even the impression that Clint was given. I truly hope that he's found the real Jesus and not Mormon heresies. But if you are a Christian child or an adult with children or influence over children, please stick around for my other videos that are going to come. Clint is partially correct. The disparity between the church and science teachings drive youth away from God. It is an attack of the devil. And he is correct that some of you have driven away your own children from the very love of God. But as equal to that horror are the parents that have failed to protect their children from the lies of evolution, because there is a very real argument to be had that if evolution is real, then God isn't. Science professors, atheists, the media, and just ordinary logic shout this very loudly and very clearly. But in 1 Peter 3:15 it says, "But sanctify the Lord God in your heart, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear." Now, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It will go such a long way to helping myself and this channel grow. If you have never experienced the saving power of Christ, then I implore you, no, even I beg you, repent and believe in Jesus. He saved me, and he died and was resurrected so that you can be set free of your sins too. If you're a believer and want to support me, I'll be setting up support links soon. But in the meantime, and into the future, I would love the opportunity to come and speak at your churches, as the Bible says in 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that is in you. If you're an atheist or an unbeliever of any kind, I invite you to comment under this video and discuss with me whatever subject you desire. It may even give me ideas for the direction for future videos. My current plan is to debunk atheist content on YouTube in a similar manner to the anti-flat earther content creators, and to produce educational videos for the layman and the unbeliever on scientific subjects that relate to the Bible. Now finally, if you're Australian and you want some powerful discussions of and solutions for the social and political problems that plague our great nation, I encourage you to subscribe to and watch Topher Field. Just please don't tell him I sent you. God bless you all, and as always, I'll be praying for you.